things that seem opposite, we notice that. Hi everyone, welcome back. Today we are going to talk about the power of contrast in your stories. This is a subject I really like because it is part of what makes for very dramatic stories and very fleshed out characters. So it is a key concept to retain and start to bring to bear in your own writing. So let's dive in. We're just going to look at a few examples of how you can leverage contrast to make your stories more dramatic and your characters more vivid. In the first place, let's talk about characters. Characters comment on one another. You do yourself a disservice if you only talk about your protagonist and you don't leverage supporting characters to help define that protagonist. Sometimes two characters will be somewhat similar in nature or in situation, but where you can really bring out important aspects of your character that you want to highlight for your readers is when you contrast them, because we are just wired to notice contrast. That's why in graphic design, they'll say complementary colors. Colors that are opposite each other on the color wheel grab the eye. Well, the same is true with story. Things that seem opposite, we notice that. So you really want to think about, how can I create characters that in one form or fashion are different? And what this means is that it's very important to tie in your story's themes, your plot, and what you want to emphasize about your characters as you think about these contrasts. All of those things bleed together. If you go through my character design framework course or my plot design framework course, which they're not currently released, but when they are, they will be linked below. So check below, because by the time you watch this, they might actually be out. But when you are designing all of those things should be integrated and comment on one another. And as we go through those framework courses, we make sure that happens. But you want to say, how can I juxtapose two characters? So, for example, Harry Potter and his cousin Dudley, in the beginning of that is, Harry is sort of thin, he's kind of got this rumpled hair, he's unloved, he's an orphan. Dursley has two doting parents, he's fat, as J.K. Rowling describes him, he is nice, he's not conscientious the way Harry is, he runs over Harry. We see that contrast. That helps us decide who we like and notice things about Harry, right? It's like when I put Dursley next to Harry, I'm going to suddenly notice, oh, Harry's thin, or Harry's this, or gee, Harry's kind of nice because Dudley's so awful. It makes Harry look nice. So that contrast highlights certain things. If I really wanted to highlight that one of my characters couldn't see well, I could put her next to someone who's got 20/20 vision, and it's going to put a magnifying glass over the trait that is that she can't see well. So think about that in your stories. Think about, and it's with all kinds of different things, all various facets of it. You want a variety. So in Little Women, Joe and Laurie. Laurie's very wealthy. Joe is very poor. That's a way that their lives contrast, and that allows Louisa May Alcott to bring certain things to life and bring certain dramatic situations to life that deal with her poverty or his wealth. So, think about someone who's adventurous versus someone who's cautious, someone who's happy versus someone who's sad. Inside Out is a great example of this, Pixar's Inside Out, where you have Joy, who is ebullient and she's proactive and she's ready to try things and go be adventurous. And then you have the sad character who she's with, who is cautious, who is down, who moves slowly, whose physical body is the opposite of Joy. So those contrasts are so stark in the beginning that it gives each of those characters a strong potential arc. If you've watched Character Arc Mastery, you know that we talk about the variety of character arcs you can have and how to build them. But those contrasting different characters as you build those arcs that we talk about in the course really helps to make some differences and juxtapositions that enhance the characters themselves. So really think about that when you're juxtaposing two characters next to each other. Other thing I would say is just the contrast of one character, who they are at the beginning, who they are at the end. That contrast can be so joyful. It's particularly glorious in Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol with Scrooge, because Scrooge is just so awful in the beginning and he's such a dear in the end that it's just very powerful contrast, and it makes the reader feel very satisfied. You can also have contrast in situations. So let's go back to Harry Potter. Harry and his life at the Dursleys is distinctly different than his life at Hogwarts. He goes from not only being poor to being very wealthy, he goes from being a nobody to being very famous and having enormous boots to fill and having this reputation he's supposed to live into. That's a very distinct contrast, and Rowling uses it quite a bit, right? Because Harry has to go back to the Dursleys in the summertime. So it's not just a one and off contrast. It's a fairly consistent juxtaposition for a while. So that makes things very, very interesting. If you've ever read the book or watched the film Cold Mountain, Charles Fraser's Cold Mountain, a great example of this is a character named Ada. She's very genteel. This is the South in America during the time of slavery, during the time of the Civil War. And Ada, big dresses, comes from the South, very genteel, very well read, moves with her father to a very small town that doesn't have any of those genteel things at all. And due to circumstances, she is no longer wealthy and she's poor and she's fending for her life, just trying to survive during the Civil War. That's an enormous contrast. Again, this kind of contrast ties with the character arc. The arc of the character and that contrasting growth absolutely connects to the plot. That's why you want to make sure that you're designing that arc to connect to every plot event. That's what makes the story rich. But this kind of a contrast is tremendously dramatic. And, you know, another contrast would be, say, the Hunger Games, to go even more recent, where Katniss is really put on the defensive. She goes from, you know, just living in her town, kind of doing her thing, trying to survive, to she's in this ring and it's life or death, and she has to be far more defensive than she had to be. It's a contrast of situation. Lastly, contrast can be in places as well. There are lots of contrasts, but these are the three we're going to look at. You can have a place. Think of Lord of the Rings. The contrast of the Shire to Mount Doom, to Mordor, it's just dramatic, the changes in location. The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. You have the normal world, we're in the house, and then you have Narnia. Now that's situational and place, because the place is different. Very obviously, you're not in a house anymore, you are now in Narnia. But it's also situational, because situationally in the house the children were children and they didn't have all this kind of power. In Narnia, it's like Harry Potter. They are the ones really, I mean, along with Aslan, but they're really forces of change. They have so much more power than they do in the real quote-unquote world. And then in Hunger Games, Katniss, you know, we have the situation where she's in a parade, she's on display, everything is like, oh, exciting, it's glorious, it's amped up to be this wonderful thing, and she's all dressed up. And then she's put in this situation where she's fighting for her life, and it is not sexy and romantic, and not that she thought it was, but you know, it's none of the glitz. It is just, we are in there fighting. So situational contrast as well. Really make sure when you're doing your writing, you are always trying to think about, how can I make this more dramatic? And the way in which, one of the ways you really make things more dramatic is contrast. Contrast of character, contrast of situation, contrast of place. They can be small contrasts, they can be big contrasts. They should be various, and there should be on numerous levels. When you start designing it in this meaty kind of way is when you truly get a very in-depth story. It also makes plotting much, much easier. There you have it. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and please subscribe. If you haven't signed up for my newsletter, I will leave a link below to do that. That is a way to learn more about my courses as well as keep updates on lessons, some free trainings that I sometimes do. So I encourage you to do that as well. I hope you're having a wonderful day and I wish you well with your writing. Bye.